This is Jordan Poyer, safety for the Buffalo Bills, and you are now listening to Cover One Buffalo Podcast. Let's go.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo Podcast. You're joining your host, Greg Tompsett, today as we have a little bit of fun going to look at the Brandon Beane press conference that we had earlier today and going to take a dabble into the Ask Cover One hashtag that we've had going on here. So before we dive in too far, make sure you're checking out what we have going on at cover1.net. A lot of awesome content all over the place. Guys doing tons of film breakdown, tons of video breakdown for the draft upcoming for players that have signed. Eric's done a lot of work into some of the running back class that's coming up here and some really exciting things. So make sure you're checking out everything that we have going on there. I'm really excited about some of the questions I already have queued up that came in off Twitter in the chat here. Please feel free to start getting some other questions lined up and I'll get through as many as we can. But we'll start today by talking about the Brandon Beane presser that happened. And, I think it was funny the way that I host the show through Zoom. All of a sudden, that's now the reality of our world and being able to talk to each other. So Brandon Beane had his virtual background up at the stadium and was going through and just everybody kind of getting used to that new normal. So there was a lot of really good recaps of that from everybody that in the Buffalo media here. And I recommend some of the threads. Matt Perino had really good detail on his. I thought Joe Buscaglia had some really good takeaways as well. So feel free to read through some of those that went through item by item on them. But I'm going to identify a few highlights that I thought were some top end ones. It started with the trade of Stefon Diggs and Brandon Beane talking about how quickly that came together. He did say that, last year around the trade deadline, they were checking in on a lot of players, didn't specifically say Diggs, but talked about that they've been in the wide receiver market. The news had come out that Emmanuel Sanders seemed like it was kind of the backup plan if things didn't happen, but they had talked to Minnesota in the afternoon. They then checked in with Sanders from a signing standpoint and then went back and checked in with Minnesota again and were able to pull off the trade. And obviously they're going to lean towards a player that's 6-7 years younger in Stefon Diggs. And oddly, not that different of a contract, about $9 million versus $11 million in Sanders versus Diggs. So obviously really excited to see that move take place. And I really like the way that he talked about Diggs and the fit with the Bills and the kind of players that they like. And he reiterated something we've talked about in the past, which is that the Bills process, they're not looking for just choir boys. That, the Bills did their digging on, Stefon Diggs and, kind of funny way to put it. But the Beane wouldn't call him a diva and said that, they'd instead use the term that Josh Allen used describing him, which is a dog, and that they want somebody who's super competitive and that he's got a clean slate coming into Buffalo. He's already reiterated on Twitter and Instagram how excited he is to be in Buffalo and that he can't wait for all of the other things going on around us to be lifted so that he can fly up there and get used to things and really start going. That he's talking with Josh Allen daily, and obviously that's not the same as, throwing passes back and forth, but that they're on the same page and that he's excited to be here. That came up again when they asked about the contract status, and Brandon Beane, first clarified that he doesn't get into those things, but that he also said, but I do want to say we've talked to Stefon and he's very excited to be here, which in Brandon Beane translation means they're not redoing his deal right now. So obviously if he plays really well for a year or two and they want to tack on some extra years and reward him, he can do that. But I've talked about that before at the acquisition of Stefon Diggs. He signed a 5-year, $72 million deal. That's not the same as Jordan Poyer signing a 4-year, $12 million deal where he was pretty underpaid. $72 million is a lot of freaking money. So it's not Amari Cooper's $100 million, but $72 million is a lot of money. And already Minnesota paid the first $26 million of that. The Bills are now going to pay the other 4 years and $46 million. He's going to get all $72 million. And if he plays well, he'll get another extension on top of that. So, for anyone he's saying that he's going to come in disgruntled or upset, he's not crying poor. He's doing all right. So we'll see where that goes from there. A couple other things that he talked about was also that, he's a guy who loves his draft picks, but that he valued the idea of a proven commodity versus a draft pick. And, last night we had Bruce Nolan on from the Nick and Nolan show and talked about how you need to isolate the variables. Bringing in a mature already fully developed veteran who's still only 26 to plug and play day one is different than some of these other receivers who may have a high upside. And, some of them may end up being as good as Stefon Diggs, maybe, and certainly not in year one. So bringing those guys in, you really isolate a lot of those variables and you're able to identify what is going on with Josh Allen and where he stands. So I thought that was a really smart way to look at it too, and was impressed the way that he talked about it. He also said that, with as competitive as Stefon Diggs is, that they also cited that Terrence Gray was a member of the Minnesota front office before coming here and worked with him and was with the Vikings, and that they made an informed decision. He also talked about how Dan Morgan was in Seattle when Quentin Jefferson was there. Some of these other moves, obviously everybody knows the Carolina connection stuff. But having that past history with those players lets you make a more informed decision. So you're able to understand where those things come from. And I think that Mike's talking about it in the chat here. There's a big difference between a guy who puts himself ahead of the team and is a diva wanting to host press conferences in his driveway doing sit-ups like some players, or a guy who is very passionate and competitive. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure they love him to harness that, but that he's focused on wanting to win and wanting the ball because I'm toasting my guy and I'm going to be able to help us win, and we didn't score on that last drive. I think that's different. And we're going to see how that works out, and that Josh Allen needs to take a step forward to make sure that he's ready to fully take advantage of this new receiving core. But it's exciting to see that. Going to run through a couple other nuggets that I thought were interesting. Mario Addison and Jerry Hughes actually lived together when they were both in Indianapolis. So that's an interesting one. They're about the same age, came out at the same time. They were both in Indy at the same time and actually lived together. So that's just kind of a little nugget that I thought was interesting. For any fans, myself included, who is excited about the free agent running back market, Brandon Beane went out of his way to talk about how TJ Yeldon is a 3-down player and probably more of a threat out of the backfield than Frank Gore, and that we're very confident in TJ Yeldon. So that obviously doesn't mean that they're out of the free agent market at running back, but he certainly hedged enough to say that if they don't sign someone, they're comfortable with Yeldon. So that may lean more towards adding a draft pick, and maybe Yeldon is that veteran guy. So we'll have to see where that goes. I love the fact that he called Tyler Matakevich a real ass kicker on special teams and said that they really want to be elite in that area and wanted to add him in there. So I thought that was funny to be able to hear him described that way. And that's certainly what you see on film. He's a demon flying down the field. People are going to notice him. He has a crazy long red beard and red hair, depending on how long it is right now. He's noticeable on the field. So we'll see where that goes. Beane also went out of his way to talk about how Darrell Williams was playing out of position last year with Carolina, and that he's a guy who he referenced his 2017 All-Pro season. He referenced Trent Murphy taking 2 years to get healthy coming off of injury, and that he thought they had a pocket of value here and that he's going to play on the right side at either right guard or right tackle. And it's something that, the way he talked about it, Darrell Williams is coming in to compete to start. Now, he's not being given anything. We have Ty Nsekhe, we have Cody Ford, we have John Feliciano, we have Spencer Long. That's a lot of guys competing at different spots. I don't think anyone outside of Deion Dawkins and Mitch Morris are guaranteed a starting spot. I think Quentin Spain is likely. I don't think they gave him 3 years and $15 million. Assuming that he's going to be a backup, but he's not guaranteed. That if something crazy happens where, let's say Darrell Williams does win right tackle, and let's say Cody Ford wins right guard, and then all of a sudden it's Feliciano versus Quentin Spain. There are some crazy scenarios where we might have backup linemen like John Feliciano and Ty Nsekhe and Spencer Long, and that would be phenomenal to be in that kind of shape. So he certainly spoke more highly of Darrell Williams than some people did. And if you only looked at the 2019 film, or if you go on Twitter and ask any Panthers fan about 2019, it's ugly, and it is. So the only thing we can rely on is that he was playing out of position, and left tackle and left guard were not good spots for him, and that they're able to get him in his second year off of injury back in his comfortable spot with a better line surrounding him than what was in Carolina, that we can see the best of him. So do I think we're going to rekindle that 2017 All-Pro season? Probably not. That's probably wishful thinking. But he's not that old of a player. Still in his 20s, still has that potential. And I'm certainly open to the idea that we captured something. And speaking of that, he spoke specifically on that with Josh Norman. Talked about how Norman was playing out of position and out of his correct scheme with where he was. And that was reiterated when that was put out there on Twitter. A handful of Redskins beat reporters quote tweeted that with the information that they agreed, that they were shocked that they paid him that much money and then shoehorned him into the wrong scheme, and that it was a terrible fit the entire time, and spoke to how poor the coaching was during that time. So again, do I think that means we're going to get the 2015 best corner in the NFL from Josh Norman? No, we're not going to. But do I think that we can get more value than maybe what was on film last year and more than what that poor scheme fit showed? Yeah, I'm open to that. So, and when you're taking low risk 1 year swings on guys like Darrell Williams, Josh Norman, that, hey, if it works out, great. If not, we still have Levi Wallace. We still have Cody Ford. We still have John Feliciano. We still have Ty Nsekhe. It's a really low risk move with all upside. So if it doesn't work out, they're off the field. If it does work out, we just recaptured value on a cheap contract. And then either we re-sign them or we rebuild their value and let them walk for a comp pick, which again, if you didn't have a chance, go listen to my discussion with Bruce Nolan last night on comp pick and how that can work out in the future. So overall, obviously it was a lot of fun. Beane was poking fun at, how it's nice to have FaceTime. I think he called it saying we all need face love. So it's interesting. I know I saw a question here. Mike Lucas was asking, when are we going to see the complete Beane press conference? I haven't seen that link sent out yet. So we'll have to wait and see where that comes from. We'll get ready to get in the questions here. One of the first ones I saw from Ron, if the full Darrell Williams contract value has come out yet. It has not. I actually checked with a lot of you guys see Aaron Wilson is one of the most connected guys, and when the official numbers come through, also talked to Brad at Over the Cap. We have not seen anything official yet on Isaiah McKenzie, EJ Gaines, or Darrell Williams. So we're down at $22 million with those three deals left. I'm going to guess EJ Gaines got somewhere in the ballpark of that Taiwan Jones number of $1.75 million, maybe $2.5 million. That ballpark, I'd be shocked if it got over $3 million. So we'll see where it comes from. The additional ones, I know that Cody Finney was talking about $6 million with a $3 million signing bonus for Darrell Williams. I saw that speculated. I want to wait and see what the details come out of what gets turned into the league, but I think that's the ballpark, is the $5 or $6 million range at the high end. I have a feeling that those could be the escalator numbers, that if he hits every single one, similar to how Ty Nsekhe was initially reported as a 2-year $15 million deal, and in reality it's going to be a lot closer to a 2-year $10 million deal because he wasn't on the field long enough to hit the play escalator. So I think that it's going to be interesting where Darrell Williams' number comes out at. And if he plays enough to hit that $6 million number, we're all going to be happy because it means that he deserved that starting spot and was out there. And if he doesn't, I'm going to guess that number is a lot close to the $3 or $4 million that Feliciano or Spencer Long got. So we'll see where those numbers come out at, but I'm sure that a lot of that is snap count, games played, games started, those kind of escalators that are going to be in there, and snap count percentage, I'm guessing, is going to be one of the big factors. So that was how they've structured Ty Nsekhe's deal. So we'll see where that comes out at as well. So again, keep the questions coming here in the area. Michael asked a critical question on a scale of 1 to 10. How comfy is my couch? And you're right, it's easily an 11. This is the most comfortable piece of furniture that I own. And I try to spend as much time down here as possible. So a very critical question. Thank you. A couple off of Twitter. Patrick Tanguay was asking, if reinstated, would you take a flyer on Josh Gordon on what would be the ultimate low risk, high reward gamble? It is my belief with the Buffalo culture and family could do wonders on a guy like that and would round out the wide receiver skill set. So I'm going to speak to it in the two parts. First, I agree that the Bills are building a culture here to afford to support someone like that. And that Stefon Diggs is a perfect example of that they're not looking for choir boys. They're looking for guys who want to compete and want to play hard and want to come in and dedicate their lives to football, and that some passion and some edge is healthy, and they're okay with that. And again, Stefon Diggs is a perfect example of that. And I'll even say the publicly available information on Antonio Brown at the time of that interest was close to that. Obviously, we've all seen that go completely off the rails since then. I don't think anybody knew that at the time, that it was to that degree. So I think that shows a guy who was always renowned for crazy work ethic and practice, crazy dedication to his ability to stay focused and involved. So I don't know, obviously with what we've seen now, I don't know that it could have stopped everything going off the rails from Antonio Brown, but I'm going to use Stefon Diggs in that I think if we keep him motivated, he's getting the ball and that we're winning, that's the right kind of environment. And I always compare it to white blood cells, that all those good culture, team friendly guys that are dedicated and love football and family oriented and, trust the process, all those kind of cliches, they matter when you add 50 of them and there's one or two or three guys who are a little bit out there. It really helps rein them in and keeps them focused, and you kind of heal that foreign organism. Now, separately, I have some concern that Josh Gordon is not that guy. So Josh Gordon's concern has always been not being dedicated to football, not putting in the additional work, not understanding the playbook, relying on unbelievable physical gifts. And then separately, all the best. If he is cleaned up and ready to do that, I hope he gets an opportunity. I don't think he's a bad person. I haven't seen him love football and have that be the question, where everyone who's come out on Stefon Diggs has been, hey, there's some passion. It spills over a little bit, maybe a little boisterous, but it's because he's so dedicated to it. And on the slow days in practice, he's the guy out there killing it, trying to push everybody else to work harder and trying to get them up to his level. That's the kind of stuff Sean McDermott's going to rally around. And I haven't seen that from Josh Gordon. So I'm going to say no on him. Another question that's out here or came off Twitter from Andrew Hardy. Do you think we are overlooking our need at cornerback 2 slot, and how do you feel about Bryce Hall? So first, depends on who you mean by we. I certainly see cornerback 2 as one of our top needs, if not our top need. I have it right there. I think I gave defensive end an edge over cornerback 2, but I had cornerback 2 as my second need. And that both of them are in a perfect high upside, low downside range, where we have Trent Murphy, we have Daryl Johnson. Adding a guy with some juice off the edge that's better than them is gravy. If not, Trent Murphy and Daryl Johnson are pretty darn good as your 8th or 9th defensive lineman. We can make that work. Cornerback 2 is the same way. We have EJ Gaines pushing Taron Johnson in the nickel, plus he can play outside. We have Levi Wallace versus Josh Norman ready to go. You can pick some high upside physical capabilities in the draft, and if they hit and are ready right off the bat, that's great. Now, normally a guy drafted 54th or later is not going to pan out that way and is not going to be ready to start on a top 3 defense in the NFL year one. If they do, that's awesome. If they come in and slowly come aboard and are just undeniable talent-wise, like Matt Milano was his rookie year, that, hey, eventually week 10, week 11, this guy has to be on the field, that's great. And we'll deal with that as it happens. I do think Bryce Hall is one of those guys. It could be, if we get lucky and a Trayvon Diggs or a Jeff Gladney or an AJ Terrell fall to 54, that makes it more likely that they'd be ready to play year one. I think Bryce Hall would just be a really nice luxury. The same idea, Noah Igbenogany, and a couple other guys like that, Michael Ojemudia is another guy I like. Damon Arnett is another guy that I like in that range. And I think that with those guys there's a chance that they could earn their way into playing time, but more likely would be the 2021 replacement for Josh Norman and then competing with Levi Wallace at that point. And I talked about that in a comp pick example last night. If you draft a guy like that, that could be the reason that you let Levi Wallace walk in 2022 and reap the comp pick benefits of that. So we'll see where that goes. But I do like Bryce Hall. I think he's absolutely one, and he's a very high process guy and a guy that McDermott's going to love. Another one from Bo on Twitter, and it was, besides quarterback, which positions do you think will not be considered at pick 54? I'll say there's not many. So at pick 54, say interior line doesn't make a lot of sense, but what if Cesar Ruiz falls to 54? It'd be kind of hard to turn down a first round talent at an interior line spot. I think it's unlikely, but I could see a scenario. The same thing. I don't think a middle linebacker or an off ball linebacker is real likely at 54, but what if Kenneth Murray or Patrick Queen fell? So quarterback, even true safety, not the guys with the versatility to play that nickel or big nickel, but a true deep safety guy. I think those are the least likely. Interior line, middle linebacker, true deep free safety, quarterback. It would take something really weird for somebody to fall to 54 for those to be the pick. Just about anybody else, tackle, running back, receiver, cornerback, defensive end, defensive tackle, any of those I could see being a pick anywhere in the second, third, fourth round, and they'd make sense to me. So it may be tight end just because there's not a ton of talent at tight end. I don't know that there's much of a scenario where the best player available is a tight end at that spot. But as Joe's bringing up in the chat and some other guys here, Joakim is talking about punter. Yeah, I don't think punter is probably a likely pick at 54, so that's a good call. But other than that, it's really just trying to be able to find, the best player available. And Beane has put himself in a great spot to be able to do that. So it's going to be interesting. Cody was asking if I play Madden on Xbox, PlayStation, or PC. I used to play a ton of Madden. I used to be really good. I used to play online and was very, very good and was competitive and highly ranked at one point. You're talking more than 10 years ago. I don't think I've played a video game in 10 years. So I'm way out of it. And I'm way too proud with way too big of an ego to let some 12-year-old whip my butt online. So I'm not going to go and put in the time to get good at it again. So I just, leave it alone. I used to love franchise mode. I would get to the point where I would simulate through seasons to get to do more free agency, negotiate contracts, do draft picks, which ta-da, that's how you ended up with me here. That was where I used to put in a lot of my time doing that kind of stuff. So it's interesting. The couple other ones here. Who would I love to see? Amy Palakowski is asking, who would I love to see as an RB2? I'm not huge on TJ Yeldon, so Brandon Beane's press conference today didn't help my thoughts a ton and how he boosted him up. I'd love to see us go after a cheap Devontae Freeman, Lamar Miller, Carlos Hyde, and then also draft a guy. I want 3 guys in the backfield that are all capable of carrying the load. I'd love to see a scenario where we have, Devin Singletary, Devontae Freeman, and Zach Moss. If we get one of the top 5 guys, that's awesome. I'd love to be able to have a truly elite talent there. But even if we pick a later guy and it's Devin Singletary, Carlos Hyde, and Antonio Gibson, I think that's a modern NFL backfield. So I'd like to see 2 more names added. I'm hoping that we still have a lot of those veteran running backs out there. I think they can be an upgrade over TJ Yeldon. Cutting him, you save almost $1.9 million. So you can offset that, offer one of those guys $2 million, and here you can have his money come aboard. So I wouldn't mind seeing that. That's a good question from Amy. Just going through, looking at a couple other things here. Cody was asking, with the addition of Williams, do I see that pushing forward to guard? My guess is that Tyan Secchi is purely the veteran swing tackle. He can play both left tackle and right tackle. He's 5% shot at starting. He's mainly the backup. I think the initial battle is Cody Ford versus Darrell Williams for right tackle. They're going to try to decide that as quickly as possible with some rotation of both guys with John Feliciano at right guard. I think Feliciano is going to get reps at left guard. So I think that's what you're going to see. I think you could see a first team line day one, and the first team line day one is going to be Deion Dawkins, Quentin Spain, Mitch Morse, John Feliciano, Cody Ford. Same 5 starters as most of last year, and it's going to be pretty clean. When the second team line comes in, it might be a lot of familiar names. It might be Tyan Secchi at left tackle, John Feliciano at left guard, Spencer Long at left guard, John Feliciano at center, Darrell Williams at right tackle, and Cody Ford at right guard. And then you might see another one where it's Darrell Williams at right guard, Cody Ford at right tackle. And I think you'll see that rotation go through to be able to see who's panning out, who's playing the best together. And then your downside is your top 3 backup guys might be Darrell Williams and Tyan Secchi and Spencer Long. That's fantastic. And the 6th, 7th, 8th offensive lineman being there, you're talking about one of the best 6, 7, 8 in the NFL from a depth standpoint. So we may not have the Tyron Smith or that top elite guy, but we're going to have 8 or 9 NFL caliber linemen who are all starting caliber. And that's an awesome problem to have. Scrolling through, looking at a couple other questions here. I do think that there could be Tyler Biadasz came up as a question, and a guy who could be there. He's a similar one to Cesar Ruiz, that I don't see that interior line as the most likely spot to be able to find someone, but that it's possible. When you get into the tackle market, Lucas Niang, Austin Jackson, Ezra Cleveland, there's a lot if for some reason Josh Jones fell a little bit, I think that offensive tackle 5 through 8 range is in play if the right guy that they like is at Matthew Pert. If that's the guy they like at 54 or 86, I could see that being a play. And it's not as exciting as picking, some falling stud wide receiver or running back, but it could be really valuable long term to be able to have that flexibility. So, obviously the idea that they're there to be able to, the idea that they're able to add in that much competition is really going to pay off, and that, Brandon Beane adding that many veteran players via free agency. We've added 10 more players. We had 20 last year, and I was trying to temper everyone's expectations. We're not going to see anything like that again. And we didn't, but we added 10 more players already, and there's probably another 1 or 2 coming. So he's just a madman at filling every hole and allowing us to go into the draft with the best player available. And then at cut down day, we're going to see the same thing where he's going to trade away just like he did with Wyatt Teller and Russell Bodine, and ended up getting, a 5th and 2 6ths, that all of a sudden that was the ammo to help get Stefon Diggs. He's going to recoup that value by trading away a couple surprise people that we may not expect, but he's going to bring in more talent and bring in more draft capital with those players moving. Marcel was asking, who do I think is the best fit in this running back draft class? This has been a really big debate. Eric and I went back and forth a lot on this, so it's kind of funny to be able to see some of the different opinions. Some people see a complement as a differing skill set. So your A.J. Dillon as your between the tackles pounder to let Devin Singletary's space, take advantage, or Singletary using his nuance between the tackle and adding an Antonio Gibson as an outside guy. I actually kind of like when you have a similar skill set, but not a big drop off in talent that doesn't key into the defense at what's going on. So I like Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Zach Moss, who are really similar to Singletary, both maybe a touch more athletic, a little thicker, a little bigger, but very nuanced, great contact balance, great breaking tackles, great, not quite as much wiggle that, Singletary has an unbelievable ability to see things that aren't even, I don't want to compare him to Barry Sanders, but that piece of Barry Sanders' game where he can see things that just normal humans can't see, and that he can make those weird little side jukes and like false step backs and things like that really give him a ton of extra movement and gets him extra yardage. So besides that, Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Zach Moss are really similar to him. I love the idea of adding a guy like that we have the two of them on rookie deals, over a 4 years period, that you're able to take them on and off the field in the tackles. So I like the idea of not tipping your hand to being able to have that guy and then having another guy that's, available to be able to go in there. Looking at a couple other questions here. So, all right, we have some questions on my unbiased, objective view of Josh Allen and Stefon Diggs stats that I want to see for the season. So I think that we're going to see a more pass-heavy attack than many fans think. So we'll get into that later in our offseason program. I'm going to do a position-by-position breakdown for each spot after the draft once we see who's been added. And when we talk about quarterback, I think we're going to pass more than teams think. We're not all of a sudden going to flip all the way over and, be the Cardinals or something like that, or throw 80% of the time. But I think that we're going to pass a little bit more than what fans think. I think that everything we've heard from Jordan Palmer is that Josh Allen is taking additional steps forward, working on his mechanics. He was talking about the tilt in his shoulders, and that he thinks some of the deep ball problems were that he was getting too tilted with that front shoulder too far up, and that he's really working on keeping them level to use that powerful arm strength, but to be able to manage the trajectory of the ball to get it where it needs to go. Obviously, adding a guy like Stefon Diggs, who was the best deep ball receiver in the NFL last year in just about every metric, would be ideal. So he took huge steps forward last year between the 10 and the 20. That intermediate game, he really did that. He has to maintain that and now add the deep ball. If he does that, I think that we're going to see almost 4,000 yards passing. I don't think he's going to get up to the 5,000 and 4,500 yard area, but I think he gets close to 4,000 yards passing. I think we see close to 30 touchdowns passing. I think we could see 35 total touchdowns, maybe 28 and 7, 28 passing and 7 rushing, that ballpark, maybe 30 and 5. I'd love to see him run a little bit less. That would be great. I'd love to see his rushing yards come back down to 300 or 400 yards and not 500 or 600. So he's still dangerous. I want him 20 or 30 yards a game, critical third downs, being a dangerous weapon, but less. I want to see 4 or 5 attempts a game, not 6, 8, 10 that he had in some of the other games. And I do think that we see a slight uptick in completion percentage. Last year he went from 52% to 59%. I'd love to see him go 59 to 62. I don't need it to be 65 or 67. I wouldn't turn it down, but another step forward there with a 62 to 63% completion percentage, 4,000 yards, 35 total touchdowns. Keep the turnovers manageable. He's not going to be 0, but he did a nice job with that. Keep them manageable, under 10 total turnovers. And we're talking about a really strong season. I think Stefon Diggs is a big part of that. I don't know, Minnesota had a really run-heavy offense, even more so than the Bills. So he's coming here, and there's going to be more pass attempts than what he had in Minnesota last year. And although John Brown is fantastic, and so is Cole Beasley, neither of them are quite Adam Thielen. So Stefon Diggs is going to come in and be the number one target. And I think that's great, where Diggs immediately comes in at probably 10 targets a game, that kind of ballpark. It lets John Brown be 6 to 8 solid targets a game. Cole Beasley be 5 to 6 targets a game. And that works out really well. I think we could see Stefon Diggs have 80 catches for 1,150 or 1,200 yards and 8 to 10 touchdowns. I think that he could be, everything John Brown was last year and a little bit more. So I think that we see a slight uptick in what our wide receiver one produced last year, with a little bit better overall offense, a little bit better receiver, and a nice overall season. And I think that John Brown still puts up, similar to last year, maybe 60 catches for 900 yards, a slight step back for him, but it's still a really nice season. And the same kind of thing for Cole Beasley, 75 catches for 750, 800 yards, that kind of ballpark. And that's why you've heard PFF and many others talk about the Bills right now from a route running standpoint, from a ability to create separation. The Bills have the top 3 receivers in the NFL overall. There's obviously some other elite ones that are certainly in the discussion. But I think the Bills arguably have the best top 3 of any receiver class in the NFL. And I'm hoping that we see them add another piece in the draft. Another question to come up here about, seeing another guy get added to that. Obviously, with those 3 guys being slightly on the smaller side, great footwork, great route running, I'd love to see that physical presence get added. You guys have heard me talk about Michael Pittman Jr. I'd love to see Chase Claypool, Colin Johnson. Obviously, if Denzel Mims falls to 54, that's a slam dunk. I'd love to see even Antonio Gandy Golden. I'm a little concerned about some of the off-field stuff I've heard with Tyler Johnson, but I'm open to that late. And I think those kind of players are the kind of guys that we could add in the mid-rounds here to be that big physical presence and afford to bring them along slowly, because when you have 3, really established top 3 options, you want a guy who can play his role really well when we go 4 wide receiver sets, can go for a jump ball in the end zone and be an upgrade over a Duke Williams and a Robert Foster. So that's what I'm looking for, is that 4th guy to come in. Another good question from Marcel. What do you think about Laviska Shenault at the 2nd round and Trey Adams in the 3rd, 4th? So 2 very different answers, both of them with injury histories. I think Laviska Shenault's stock falling with this historic draft class. And I know another question came up there about, with all the COVID-19 stuff happening, was there a question on, maybe a historic opportunity for undrafted free agents at receiver? So I'll address those together. I think there's absolutely affecting things. I think that it's pushing down some of the wide receivers that normally would have been obvious first round talents. There's so many receivers that they're going to fall down. If there's any question, the two that I think are going to become the three that are going to become the best values are going to be Laviska Shenault, Brian Edwards, and Van Jefferson. Those three names, because of the bad timing of their injuries, they're going to get pushed down. There are so many other top end talents at receiver that it's going to be easy to just, by tiebreaker, pick somebody else. They're going to go a round or two later than they should have when they're all really good talents. I would love to see us get a value on Laviska Shenault at 54, at Brian Edwards in the 3rd or 4th round, Van Jefferson in the 5th or 6th round, when they all would have gone well above there. So those are three guys I think are going to be helped by it. Trey Adams, certainly not in the 3rd or 4th round. I don't know that I want him at all. His film is really, really bad. He had a couple early flashes early in his career. He hasn't been able to get over any of the injuries. It was really ugly at the combine. I've seen enough that I'm concerned. I had talked about him at one point that, you take a dart throw on the upside that you can recapture that early potential. For me, that would need to be in the 5th or 6th round, not the 3rd or 4th. So I'd be anybody in the 5th or 6th round is, that you can't have a downside. It's a 5th or 6th round pick. They barely ever pan out. So, it's okay to take an upside swing there. I would not be comfortable with that 3rd or 4th rounder on Adams. But if he really fell and started to tumble into late day 3, it's worth a dart throw at that point. Josh Payton was asking, who do I prefer out of Pittman or Claypool? Chase Claypool's combine really blew him out of proportion. He did not play that fast on the field. His film is a 4th or a 5th round pick. His combine has everybody thinking he's a 1st round pick. Now, does that mean there's untapped potential that we could get more out of that? Sure. Michael Pittman caught 100 balls at USC, well over 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdowns, had a dominant performance, and also ran well and jumped well at the combine. Now, he ran a 4.51 and not a 4.39 or whatever the heck Claypool was, or 4.41. But he did really well also and had the production on the field. I think Michael Pittman is a more refined, better receiver right now, and I would always lean towards that. The guy who put up the better film and played better, I'd rather have him. I do open up to the fact that maybe the coaching and the quarterback play at Notre Dame falsely deflated Chase Claypool's production, and if in our research and our scouting department they think that's the case, I'll be on board fully because that dude's a freak. So if they can harness that and capture that, playing special teams early, playing jump ball, playing almost like an oversized tight end, I think that's exciting. So I'd be open to that. And I want Claypool, but if both of them are on the board and I only get one, I would pick Michael Pittman Jr. What kind of stats do I see for Dawson Knox and Devin Singletary? Dawson Knox, I think, is going to play a lot. I think that it's tough when you have that good of the other three receivers. I don't see a scenario where he becomes the number 2 target in the passing offense. I think he's going to be a really valuable 4th option. So it's awesome that a guy like Dawson Knox is your 4th option. It's tough for your 4th option to eat all that much. I think he's a seam buster. I think he's a matchup nightmare. I think he's a physical presence. I think he could maybe score a nice amount of touchdowns. I could see that, especially right now. We don't have that big physical guy in the red zone. So he could be that target in the red zone. But I think he's probably looking more at 45 catches and 450, 500 yards. Most tight ends are in the 10, 11 yards per catch area. But maybe he gets sneaky and gets 6 or 8 touchdowns. But I think he's probably closer to 40, 45 catches and 450, 500 yards than a Travis Kelce, George Kittle, guys like that who are the number 1 option in their offense, and they're getting fed like a number 1 receiver. It's kind of hard to match that, even if he might even have some of that capability someday. That's just not the way this offense is set up here. And maybe as he develops and John Brown and Cole Beasley age and move on in their careers, maybe he becomes that secondary option, and it someday is Stefon Diggs and then Dawson Knox, and then you're talking about the 70 to 80 catch, 1,000-yard, 12 touchdown seasons. It's just, we're not at that stage right now. And it's really hard with Devin Singletary. Devin Singletary is going to be really tough until I see who else they sign and who else they draft. If they have one of those three studs fall that are first-round talents, and by that I mean J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Taylor, or DeAndre Swift to 54, I think you're talking about a 50-50 backfield, at most 60-40, because you're just drafted a first-round talent, and the value of that is utilizing them on their rookie contract. So, in that case, I still want Devin Singletary to get a ton of touches, but I'm okay if it's 60% and the other 40% is the other guy. And obviously that's going to deflate his overall value, his fantasy value, things like that. If we just pick up a veteran, or say we just keep TJ Yeldon and we draft a guy like an Antonio Gibson, you could be talking about a 1,500 total yard season where it's 1,000 yards rushing, 1,100 yards rushing, 400 or 500 yards receiving. I think that's possible. I think a 1,500 yard from scrimmage season is in Devin Singletary's capability. I think you're a better football team if we were to add Jonathan Taylor, and then Singletary has, 600 yards rushing, 500 yards receiving for 1,100 total, and Jonathan Taylor has 800 yards rushing and 100 receiving for 1,000 yards total, but together they have 2,100 total yards and are just a monster combination, keeping each other fresh, keeping each other healthy, managing the wear on the tires for hopefully a nice playoff run. So I think that's better for your football team. Obviously, it's not as much fun in fantasy if you own one of those guys, but I care a lot more about the Bills than I do about anybody's fantasy football team. So ideally, I want another stud alongside Devin Singletary. I'm not looking for somebody to beat out Singletary or to take his job. I would love to have the problem going into 2021 where I don't even know who the running back one is because we have two studs. I want that problem in my life. Just a couple more questions here. Can I see Duke Williams making a huge statement next season? It's coming from Creasby. I can see Duke Williams making this team. I think that's even unlikely. I honestly can't see him making a huge statement. Trading a first-round pick for Stefon Diggs, already having a 1,000-yard receiver and guy who played fantastic for us in John Brown, and a great slot receiver who's one of the top 5 wide receiver threes in the NFL, and Cole Beasley. There's just not enough balls to go around for Duke Williams to make what you're calling a huge statement. Now, if he ends up making the roster, let's say we don't pick a guy, or let's say we pick a guy in the 6th round, like Joe Reed out of Virginia, and he becomes the guy who bumps Isaiah McKenzie off the roster, and we still need that big physical presence. I could see Duke Williams getting himself some touches as wide receiver 4, and maybe he gets 20 catches, but the 20 catches are for 350 yards at a really high yards per catch, and he ends up getting 4 touchdowns in some big critical moments. If that counts for you as a huge statement, I could see that. I don't see any scenario where he's above there, and I think that he's less than 50-50 to make the roster as of right now, just because of how deep this group is, and I'm assuming that we draft at least one receiver. If we draft 2 receivers, he's going to need to play out of his mind in training camp to be able to make this team, and that's a great problem for us to have. It's tough for fans who have, had their heart set on Duke because he's a great story, but that's going to be tough to go that route. Does TJ Yeldon count as the veteran in the room from John Patrick? And for anybody who's not familiar, obviously McDermott and Beane like to have a veteran in every room. We've done it each year so far. They had Mike Tolbert, they had Chris Ivory, they had Frank Gore. TJ Yeldon signed as a very young free agent at 25. He's now 26. Singletary's going into his 2nd year. In theory, I guess they can probably talk themselves into that he is. I think it makes more sense to add a Lamar Miller or a Carlos Hyde or a Devontae Freeman. Those are the 3 names I like on the free agent market, and then draft somebody as well. I think that it's close enough that they can talk themselves into that, where TJ Yeldon is the veteran in the room for next year. But, it's all relative in where I doubt that that's what they want. I doubt that that's the plan of what they're doing so far. So we'll see where that goes. We'll do 2 more questions here. I can ramble for a long time, but eventually I need a drink. Who is the starting defensive end? It's an interesting question. I would say money talks in my world, and in most of the times in the NFL. Jerry Hughes is for sure going to continue his starting job. And in this year, in 2020, they're giving Mario Addison $13 million. He's going to start. I'm pretty sure. Now, I actually think that it makes more sense to play Quentin Jefferson as some rotational rundown defensive end, Trent Murphy in some of that role, and making sure you're using Mario Addison in high leverage pass rush situations, which isn't always first down. So I think it's going to be relatively ceremonial, where the starting line on the first snap of the game is going to be Jerry Hughes, Star Lotulelei, Ed Oliver, and Mario Addison. Then you're going to see situational rotation, where obviously just because he's starting, I don't think Star plays the second most reps at defensive tackle. I think we're going to have I think he's going to play 40 to 45%, and we're going to have other guys who also play 40 to 45%, maybe 50%, like a Quentin Jefferson, like a Vernon Butler. And Ed Oliver, I think, is one of the only defensive tackles who could push up into the 60, 65, 70% range, because Harrison Phillips, Starr, Vernon Butler, and Quentin Jefferson soak up the rest. Same idea at defensive end. I do think we draft someone here. I think it's possible we have another signing, but I think that as of right now, it would be Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, and Trent Murphy each playing about 60% of the snaps, and then the extra 20% is Daryl Johnson, depending on if we sign somebody else or if we draft another guy who's an upgrade over Daryl Johnson. That could shift, where it could be 60% Jerry, 60% Addison, 40% Hughes, 40% Trent Murphy, and 40% whoever, Curtis Weaver or, Julian Aquara or Josh Uche or whoever. In my fantasy, it's Yetur Gross-Matos falls somehow to 54 and we add him in there. But that kind of thing is where we could see it. We'll go with one more question here, or maybe the last couple here, just to be able to close these things out. So, is making a play with next year's pick to get Chase on too unrealistic for discussion? Yes, that's not realistic. I love talking about it because I would love to get my hands on K'Lavon Chaisson. I don't see any scenario. This same thing comes up with the current price tag for Yannick Ngakoue. I talked about it on last night's show. If Ngakoue gets into the Clowney territory where you're past the franchise tag negotiating window and he cannot be re-signed and it brings him down to the rental price tag, then we're talking. I don't see any scenario where Brandon Beane trades away 2 consecutive first-round picks. I don't see it. So anything that involves next year's first-round pick, I think, is out. Now, if you're telling me that K'Lavon Chaisson starts to fall for some reason, which he shouldn't, and gets to out of day one, and he's on the board going into day 2, pick 33, and everybody's clamoring, because they would be if that was the case, for that number 1 overall pick for Cincinnati at 33, I think the Bills would have to offer their second and third and next year's second to get up to that 33rd pick. If it's for a stud like Chaisson, I could probably get my mind around it to figure it out. I'd hate to give up the 4 picks that we did for Diggs and then 3 more picks here for that pick. It puts a lot of pressure on him to make additional trades, but for a stud like that, I'd talk myself into it to figure it out. Is Corey Liuget still on the team? John Patrick? No, he's a free agent. He is unsigned by anybody else. We're getting to the point now where he probably doesn't want a camp invite for Buffalo, because we're already Vincent Taylor's on the roster. So just at defensive tackle, we already have Starr, Ed Oliver, Vernon Butler, Harrison Phillips, Vincent Taylor, and whatever you count Quentin Jefferson as is like a half D end, half D tackle. That's 5, 6 roster caliber guys that we're already going to be trading one of them away at cut down day. So it doesn't make much sense for Corey Liuget to pick Buffalo as a spot to come back to, short of an injury happening. So very likely that's going to be outside of there. Anything else here to close things out? What about the corner draft class? Who do you think would be on the board in the second or third round? Who would be the best fit? So we'll do this as a final question. there's a lot of talent in that range. Obviously, one of the most intriguing names is Stefon Diggs' brother, Trayvon. Trayvon Diggs is a 6'2" corner coming out of Alabama, and is a converted wide receiver and a very physical presence, great measurables, and has some development to go. But having Levi Wallace and Josh Norman would be ideal. Any of those other late first rounders that somehow start to fall, your Jeff Gladney's, AJ Terrell, Noah Igbenogany, guys like that would be really nice. Once you get into that second round range, you're talking about guys like Bryce Hall, Michael Ojemudia, Damon Arnett. Players like that are guys who could be in play there to be able to do it. And I want a crazy value at every single pick. So I'm not ecstatic about any of those second tier guys at 54. I'd hope we get lucky with one of them at 86. But if one of those, the cutoff for me is AJ Terrell, Trayvon Diggs, and Igbenogany. If those guys are there, those are studs who are first round caliber guys, and you take them at 54 immediately, and they could push and compete for a starting spot or just be a really high end cornerback 4 to be able to compete and plug in anywhere. But we'll see where those things go. Really appreciate it, guys. This was a ton of fun. Awesome job in the chat. Wanted to give a little bit of a recap for the Brandon Beane presser. Had more questions that I could even get to, so I apologize if you didn't get your question answered this time. We'll do another one of these next week. I thought this was a lot of fun, but appreciate it. It was a lot of good talk with everybody. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.